Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on ARA History Untold. This is a turn-based strategy game developed by Oxide Games and published by Xbox Game Studios, and as I'm recording this video, it's very close to its 1-year anniversary of release. It released back in September of last year, and it just didn't really seem to go anywhere. I mean, to give you an idea, if you look at Steam charts, the all-time peak for the number of players on Steam is 3,449 as I am recording this, and its 24-hour peak is 105 players. That is some remarkably low numbers for something being backed by as big a company as Microsoft. Of course, you do have to keep in mind that it is a brand new IP, so it doesn't have established franchise draw behind it, and it also didn't have all that much of an advertising campaign behind it. Sure, it had some advertising, but it definitely didn't have the full weight of Microsoft's advertising machine behind it, and it also didn't really get a whole lot of coverage from YouTubers and streamers and such. You might have seen a stream here or there, or a video here or there, but there just didn't really seem to be all that much enthusiasm about the game when it originally launched, and between the technical problems the game had on launch and this being a Day 1 Game Pass release, it's difficult to know what the actual reach of this game was. How many people were messing around with it on Game Pass versus actually having bought the game outright. Although given how few people were playing this game at its peak on Steam, that's pretty easy to imagine that it did not sell well. And even among the audience it did find, the question arises why this game didn't really make much of a splash. Well, I figured that since I have a Game Pass subscription and it's on Game Pass, I might as well give it a try, because it did seem like something that would be up my alley. I mean, after all, I really enjoy the Sid Meier's Civilization series, and that's pretty much the entirety of the historically based 4X turn-based strategy genre. I mean, don't get me wrong, over the years there have been a few games here and there that popped up, but very few games have ever even remotely attempted to compete in the same space that Civilization occupies. And even as I'm recording this video right now in September of 2025, there's still basically no competition in that space. I mean, sure, games like Millennia, Ozymandias, and Old World exist, but they all didn't even come remotely close to making a dent in the genre. The only one that kind of came close was Humankind, and while that game did well enough for itself, it didn't really make much of a dent in Civilization's commanding lead of the genre, although it did clearly have some influence on the development of Civ 7, and that did not go well for Firaxis, so maybe it's just a matter of people really like Civ, and anybody trying to do something in the same space but their own take on it just isn't able to find success. I don't really know for certain because I haven't messed around with all the sort of Civ competitors yet, but after messing around with ARA, I can tell you why this particular game did not find an audience in that kind of space. It's because it's not actually a Civ-style 4X game, even though it seems like it is from what they were showing off in the advertising material and what it looks like if you look at it on, say, the Steam page. You basically start having to dig into the Steam reviews and such to figure out what this game actually is. It is not a 4X game as much as it is a resource management game. The big comparison I see here is that it's basically like if you took the Anno series, which are all city building games that are very heavily focused on a sort of production chain of resources. The comparison is that it's basically like if you took that style of gameplay and you made it turn-based and expanded it to an empire level rather than just a single city. Now, as far as how apt of a comparison that is, I can't really comment on that all that much because I actually haven't messed around all that much with the Anno series. I do have most of them, but I've just never really delved deeply into them yet. I have played other city building games that are focused on resource production chains, so I do still understand the comparison to some degree. It's just that I can't really comment specifically on the Anno comparison. At least not until I delve further into the Anno series, and I don't know when I'm going to get around to that. What I can focus on is how ARA handles things, and it is a mess. to put it very lightly. So the way it all works is you select a leader that also chooses your empire in the process. You're going to have different bonuses to different types of production based on what leader you choose, and you might also get things like military unit strength bonuses and such like that. Then once you've selected your leader and thus your civilization, then you start the game off and it will randomly generate a map for you that will plop you down somewhere. Now, unlike a lot of other turn-based strategy games of a similar style, instead of having, say, a hex or square grid, in this game everything's broken down by regions. So instead of moving a unit, say, a hex away, you'll move them a region away. Within each region, there are numerous subregions. Some of these subregions have extra resources in them, things like, say, copper ore, or elephants, or horses, or fish, or something along those lines, while others will be empty space. When you start the game off, you'll start with your single region occupied by your main city, and as that city's population grows, it will continue to give you additional claims that you can then use to claim regions in its vicinity. As you claim these various regions, you will need to build improvements in the subregions within those regions in order to maximize your various production lanes. So if you have an additional resource like, say, horses in a particular region, then you will want to build a farm improvement on the sub-region containing those horses in order to maximize your production of horses. And then you can fill out the other sub-regions with additional improvements. If there's a resource on them, then you will obviously want to make a harvesting structure on them. Whereas if they don't have any particular resource on them, you might want to put some sort of additional production facility on them, or put some sort of additional improvement that enhances the output of whatever is already in that greater region. And that's going to be the majority of your economic gameplay loop. You're just going to be trying to maximize whatever production you have in any particular region. If you build a structure that produces resources, these will be things like, say, tools, or metal ingots, or codices, or any number of things like that you can then use to build additional, more advanced improvements, or build what are called triumphs in this. It's the equivalent of a wonder from the Civ series. It's something like, say, the pyramids at Giza, or the Colossus of Rhodes, or something along those lines. And obviously only one of those can be built per match, so whenever one particular civilization builds it, that's it. Nobody else can build that, as opposed to the other kinds of improvements you can build in the various regions and subregions that will either have no cap at all on the number of them you can build, or they'll have a cap on the amount that can be built within a particular city, or the amount that can be built in your entire nation. This process gets more and more involved the more you expand your empire. You go beyond just having one city, you move into multiple cities. Each city will gradually grow and be able to expand into neighboring regions. Each city will have its own various improvements that you can construct, and its own resource production that you'll need to keep in mind. And there is an absolute ton of resources in this game. There are 4 main ones, which are food, materials, timber, and wealth, and those are obviously going to get the most use across the board. But as your empire continues to expand and develop, as you get more and more technologies, and you start to upgrade buildings, and of course find more advanced structures, you're going to need more of those advanced resources, the goods that you produce from the raw materials that you're harvesting. And all told, I believe there's over 200 of all of those combined. Needless to say, that's a lot to keep track of, and the game unfortunately does a pretty poor job of allowing you to keep track of things. The interface itself is just not very intuitive. You have a constant reminder of your 4 main resources, but if you want to break down the raw materials and the goods that you have access to, then you're going to have to start digging around in menus and looking at production queues. Each individual production improvement requires you to go in there and manually set all of the production queues when you initially start it up, and as you expand the repertoire of materials that you can produce, you're going to have to go back and update all of those again, and it just ends up getting really messy really quickly. And while there is documentation within the game to explain the various resource production chains and such, it's just not presented to you in a very intuitive manner, and it quickly becomes overwhelming. Compounding this overwhelming feeling even more is that most of these resources can be used as amenities, meaning that they're also consumables of a sort. You can slot them into the amenities slots, and then it will provide boosts to various types of production depending on the specific resource you're using. So you need to be keeping track of your 4 main resources the most, of course, and then there's all these additional resources you need to be keeping track of because you use them to produce different structures, to produce different units, and they may also be used as upkeep for those units and improvements as well. And you need to keep track of what they can be used to produce because the goods will feed into each other, and you need to keep track of all of the different boosts that using these resources as amenities can give you. That is all a ton of information that needs to be at your fingertips, and it's not exactly intuitive to access in this game. Not impossible to access, just not intuitive. It makes the whole process of trying to learn how to play this game remarkably frustrating. But if it were only about maximizing production chains and keeping track of all these different resources, that would be one thing. The problem is that this is also still an empire building game, and that means that you will need to trade with and ultimately come into conflict with various other factions. And that will steer you directly into the game's biggest problems, the first of which is the AI. Now, obviously this is much less of a problem in multiplayer, but the various AI-controlled factions that you will encounter can be wildly all over the place. They might love you, they might hate you, they may oscillate between the two. It's really never clear exactly why they're doing what they're doing, or really how to kind of game the AI. You can do certain things that kind of make sense, like setting up trade agreements or setting up research agreements if they even agree to them in the first place. But you might, for example, have a really positive relationship with a particular nation when all of a sudden they just start demanding tribute from you and just generally antagonizing you. And you might also have a really negative relationship with a nation, and the reverse is true for them. They suddenly start trying to be all buddy-buddy with you out of nowhere. Or you might be exploring and run into a nation completely across the map, and they just declare war on you out of nowhere with basically no diplomacy or trade agreements or anything like that going on at all, and then you just sit there twiddling your thumbs because they're completely across the map and don't have forces in your region to do anything about it. It can get genuinely baffling at times, and then when you do end up inevitably in a war with whatever nation you end up at war with, you will find yourself having to deal with the game's flat-out terrible military mechanics. Now, at a glance, it seems like it should work like, say, the Civilization games, or pretty much any other 4X game, where you select a unit to produce in whatever city you're producing them in. It produces the unit, that unit has an upkeep cost, and then you would place that unit in whatever region you're wanting to defend, or you would send them off to attack enemies or something like that. Thing is, while that makes sense, that is not how this system works. How it actually works is that you train the unit, it has an upkeep cost, and then if you want to actually field that unit, you have to muster it. You don't simply train the unit and then it spawns on the map and then you can move it around. Instead, you train the unit, it goes into reserves, and then you can either muster it as an individual squad, meaning just that one unit, or as part of a battle group like a battalion, so it's multiple units combined into this one army. The thing is that if you want to muster, say, a battalion, you need 2 infantry units, an archer unit, and a cavalry unit. And if you don't have units of all of those different types, you cannot muster the battalion. This is all weird enough, but then you have to factor in that mustering a unit takes 4 turns. It doesn't just happen instantly. This is regardless of whether you're deploying a single squad or deploying something like a battalion. Obviously, this isn't really a problem when you're playing as the aggressor and you're mustering your units to attack the enemy, but when the enemy attacks you and you're mustering units to defend your region, it's actually a pretty nasty problem, because not only do you have to wait the multiple turns to muster the unit at all, you can't do it in the region that's being attacked. You have to do it from somewhere else and then send the troops in. This frustration is even further compounded because battles take multiple turns to resolve. So even if you do manage to muster units to defend a territory that's being attacked, that territory will still be taking damage during this whole thing, and there's not really much you can do about it until you either lose the region entirely, or you manage to kick the enemy out. So as you're mobilizing your armies and fighting off invaders or invading the enemy, you're probably getting increasingly frustrated with the mechanics, and then the game just pulls everything out from under you. Because wars have a time limit. So you can be in the middle of invading the enemy and just absolutely demolishing them. You are on the brink of victory, and then suddenly the game just steps in, says the war is over, and declares either one person the victor or declares it a draw. And the manner in which it gets declared a draw is especially stupid because, as an example, I had one nation declare war on me and then proceed to do basically nothing while I said, okay, well fine, if you're going to declare war on me out of nowhere from across the map and you only have one city on my continent, then I'm just going to field an army and lay siege to that city. So that's exactly what I did. I captured that city. In fact, I razed it to the ground, and then the game just went on for a few more turns before it said, okay, war's over. What's that? You razed an entire enemy city to the ground and they did absolutely nothing to you? Well, guess that was an inconclusive result. I'm sorry, there is absolutely no realm of reality in which one side losing absolutely nothing and the other side losing a city somehow constitutes an inconclusive result. No, the side that lost nothing is the clear winner there, and the side that lost something is the clear loser. I legitimately do not understand what the developers were thinking with any of this stuff. It just seems like the developers fundamentally do not understand what makes a 4X-style empire-building strategy game compelling in the first place. I mean, the main things you're going to be concerned with in an empire-building strategy game are building up your empire's economy and expanding that empire through just settling different regions and, of course, conquest. And yet, the military aspect of this game is pretty much an afterthought and just feels absolutely awful to engage with. Your options for avoiding the warfare in the first place are clumsy at absolute best. The economy aspect of the game is overly convoluted and just downright overwhelming with how much crap it shoves in your face. And even doing something as simple as trying to expand your empire by settling different regions and then expanding your claims on those regions as the cities grow is still clumsily implemented because you not only have a city cap, so you can only build up to a certain number of cities, but that all ties so heavily into the economy aspect of the game that you might build a city and it seems like you've got everything you need, and then suddenly it's not producing enough resources, you've stagnated your growth, you can't actually expand that city's borders anymore, and because you would have to build something else in that city in order to correct the resource shortfall that you've got, you're just stuck with a completely stagnant city. You might be able to compensate for the resource shortfall by overproducing at other places, but the city that has that resource shortfall stagnates and there is absolutely nothing you can do to correct it. Now sure, you can build a city in a bad spot in other 4X strategy games, but generally speaking, when you build a city somewhere, you'll know well in advance that it's a bad spot to build a city. Meanwhile, in ARA, you can build a city in a spot that seems like it'll be great. It'll have all the resources that it needs. It even has strategic resources that you can build additional production structures on. And so you place down your city center, and then you start expanding the city as the population grows, and you build all the improvements you need to take advantage of resources, get production chains going, and then just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you seem to be losing massive amounts of food in the city, and you just don't really know why. And in order to find where the exact problem is, you're having to dig through a bunch of menus that just aren't very intuitive, but even if you are able to find the problem, it's not like you can actually do anything about it, so you're just stuck with a city that's complete crap. That kind of thing is frustrating enough in other 4X games where you don't have such a heavy emphasis on the production chain, but when you've got 200-ish resources to keep track of, and you suddenly have an entire city's worth of production needing to be completely redone from scratch, that's really going to throw a spanner into the works. And maybe there are ways to compensate for some of these issues when you've gotten really comfortable with the game, but I have a feeling that by the time you get comfortable enough with ARA to where this isn't really as much of a problem for you anymore, you're talking about enough of a time investment that the vast vast majority of people even attempting to play this thing have already checked out a long time ago. That's not to say that the game doesn't have redeeming qualities at all. I mean, it does cover some empires and leaders throughout history that are a bit lesser known. Things like the Palmyrene Empire, for example, which was extremely short-lived in actual history. It only lasted for about 3 years. But it is one of the available civilizations in this, so you get to have that nice what-if alternate history vibe going on. And even among the more well-known nations that are included, there are some that just don't really get shown all that much in other 4X strategy games, like, say, Argentina or Thailand. So that's pretty cool, and then the game also has built-in mod support, which is always nice to see. But unfortunately, that core gameplay loop just isn't fun unless you are so locked in on the production chain aspect of it that you can ignore all of the other shortcomings. And unfortunately, I just think that's a minuscule number of players overall. It's a real shame, and it makes it obvious why this game had such a small player base to begin with and why it has dwindled to such a degree. There are just other 4X strategy games out there that are going to be infinitely more enjoyable for a much wider number of people than a game that has a few interesting ideas in it, but the execution is just so locked in on the production chain aspect of it that it alienates a huge portion of the player base right from that, and then it alienates most of the rest of it, with the other aspects of the game being quite lacking. And as a result, I just can't really recommend this to anybody. Certainly not for their full $60, $70, or even $80 US asking price, depending on which edition you go for, with certain leaders being locked behind the so-called premium edition of the game for $80, or a $20 upgrade over the standard, which is just obnoxious and typical of modern gaming, of course, where they'll just carve away sections of game that should have been in there at launch and say, nope, this is premium extra DLC content or whatever. But anyway, even at a significant discount, it's still not really worth it. Not unless they do some very dramatic overhauls to the gameplay. And I just can't really see them doing that because it would have to be significant enough overhauls that it would dramatically change the way the game plays. And I feel like they're just way past the point where they would actually be able to do that. So unfortunately, I just don't really see it being able to get the overhauls it actually needs to be a solid contender in the 4X historically based strategy genre, and as a result, I just can't recommend it, regardless of whether you get it at a discount, even if it's really cheap, especially considering that I was messing around with this thing on Game Pass, and even that didn't feel like it was worth it. So take that for what it's worth, I suppose. Thank you all very much for watching, and thanks for bearing with me on how sporadic my video releases have been. I know it's just been kind of a mess in that regard, and I keep hoping that I'll have more time at some point in the near future to be able to buckle down and make some more videos and get a more regular release schedule going, but unfortunately I just don't know when things are going to align in my favor in that regard at this point, so we just have to keep playing it by ear, and I do what I can when I can. At any rate, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thank you all very much for watching. If you like my channel, please consider supporting it on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's fine. I understand. But the option's there if you're interested, and every little bit helps out. You'd be amazed how even $1 a month can help out. Now I'm going to go ahead and get back to trying to clear up some of that backlog, and I will see you all in later videos.